to do yada yada, yakety yak time for about half an hour. And I would love to start with William introducing yourself to the audience.
Hi, yeah, I'm Will Benton. I'm a product architect at NVIDIA, so I sort of think about what data science, ML ops, LLM ops should look like from a user perspective and sort of provide technical advice across the product group here.
Awesome. And we're just starting slow. So any interesting or notable prompts that you've used over the last year that have sort of been a bit odd or fun?
So there are a lot of things you could talk about for productivity. I have a fun example, if that's okay. If you think about Western music notation, I don't know how many people spend any time thinking about Western music notation, but you could take a score published last year and give it to a professional musician from JS Bach's day, and they'd basically be able to understand what was going on. And the music notation has not dramatically changed that much, except in the middle of the last century, from roughly World War I to the 1970s, you had all this avant-garde, sort of wacky graphical notation for avant-garde music that no one wants to listen to today. But if you ask Midjourney to generate a musical score in this style, it will produce something beautiful. And that's interesting both as abstract art, and it's interesting to think, what was this trained on? Where did this come from? What would this sound like as music? So that's sort of a fun distraction I've found with generative AI.
That's awesome. And I think, you were talking about multimodal as well, and just the expansion of both the imagery, but into music is very cool. Meryem, do you have something fun?
That's so much better than mine. Mine is that I used ChatGPT to make my Christmas cards. We send all of our clients like AI themed Christmas cards. So did AI themed Christmas trees, etc. And then I had it write a nice little message inside. But that's way more highbrow than my answer.
Contract termination clauses, was
Boo.
I built a Halloween art project in which you could type a prompt into, let's say you type like an argument into a prompt. So you say, all right, a hot dog is a sandwich. And then underneath the covers, it would generate two historical figures. So it'd be like, all right, it's going to pick Mary Curie versus Cleopatra. And it forces those two historical figures to argue to each side of that point forever. And I hooked it up to, I think it's called 11 Labs, so it'd do the audio too. And I had different voices for them, of course. And so they'd argue with each other forever and get more and more heated. Which was weird.
Wow, I feel like that should be my alarm clock. Just like immediately get out of bed, turn it off. Awesome. I would love to start with a question around microwaves, as we talked about earlier. Just kidding. But
I don't know anything about microwaves.
shout back to Kyle and the anecdote around microwaves. But really, when we're talking about the ecosystem of models, and this seems to be largely the conversation today, how are we orchestrating, curating the right sizing of these models and the ecosystem? So when you look at the market conditions where we're talking about consolidation versus how much of it you should do yourself to ensure that there is competitive edge or differentiation, where are we going in sort of the near future? Where might that ecosystem be? Is it really a spectrum of very specialized to generic, or is it these large models that we end up just finding some offsprings off of?
Well, in your question, you mentioned kind of like where we should be spending our time. I think as a business trying to adopt AI, the place that you should be spending your time is in the place where you think you can gain differentiation. And that is typically with your data sets and your know-how and your business processes. It's very rarely on the infrastructural layer, unless you're someone like OpenAI, where if you make it 5% faster, you're really getting a big win. So I always suggest that people should focus on that differentiation layer. I also think when it comes to which models are going to win, we're pretty aligned with Dataiku's vision that, at least for now, it's too early to say who's going to be winning, and that when you're building your architecture, you really want to be building it in that model agnostic way. Like, for example, we, a couple months ago, made our API compatible with the OpenAI API because a lot of people wanted to just be able to switch in and out. My personal belief is that I think we're going to end up with a lot of specialized models because it's more efficient, because when you specialize the model, you can make it much, much smaller. But I'm also open to the idea that I might be wrong on that, and there might be one model that wins and rules it all, but I think it's too early to say, and it's too early to be picking a model or a winner at this stage.
Yeah, I think one thing Meryem you said in your talk that really resonated with me is that the differentiation comes from your own data, right? If you think about hiring a new IC in your organization, it doesn't matter how smart they are. It doesn't matter how good they are. They're not going to do anything useful for the first 6 months, right? Because they're getting onboarded to your culture. They're learning the way you do things. They're learning the things that are unique about your organization. Similarly, with these models, there are techniques you can use to provide context or to fine tune a model, and there's a spectrum of these things. But that's ultimately where it's going to be valuable for the things that are core to your business.
I'd add one comment on being able to switch between models. I think it's interesting that OpenAI started as a nonprofit organization that was dedicated to opening up AI to everyone. Then created a singular model that exploded into popular culture and everywhere. But inadvertently, they have created an open standard for models, which I'm very appreciative of. And by open standard, I literally mean the API interface in which we interact with LLMs has basically become standardized on that OpenAI structure, which is rad. I love that. Less work for us.
We've also talked about differentiation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about value, this return on AI concept. And there are real opportunity costs that are being felt across boardrooms all the way down to individual contributors. And when we think of the pace that is necessary to execute for value, there's an inference there. So how can we think about the use cases that will drive value right now? And some observations around that kind of friction around opportunity cost.
Yeah, I like to think about this analogously to other machine learning techniques that people have adopted in recent memory. So if you think back to like 7-8 years ago, look at how people are using deep learning, right? Not a lot of organizations are using deep learning in their core business, especially if they're in a regulated industry, right? Because you have something that's a model that's difficult to interpret. It's easy to make the model misbehave with bad inputs, and it's difficult to define metrics to train the model for, to optimize the model for, or it's not obvious in some cases. Instead, what you see is a lot of people using deep learning to improve customer experience, right? So if you run an investment bank, you might not be using deep learning to manage portfolios, but you might be using deep learning to sort of automatically route someone who places a customer service call to the right person based on what they were just doing on your website, right? So I think in that case, often computer scientists think about combinatorial problems where the solution is hard to find but easy to verify, right? I think you want to find a use case where you can identify the business metric you're driving, even if you don't know how to verify that the model is doing the right thing and track that over time. And something that's sort of not on your critical path, but can improve your customer experience.
Yeah. And sorry, just to follow up, like at NVIDIA, when you're speaking with the teams and how to propose solutions and talk to customers, is this something that is constantly in that conversation right now of time to value, opportunity cost?
Yeah, I guess a recurring theme I've had throughout my career is like, how simple and dumb can we make something, and still get value out of it. I think this is really, a lot of people start off very ambitious with their plans, and I think you can really let the perfect be the enemy of the good there, right? Starting off with something that's easy to prove out and sort of you'll know quickly. One thing we do at NVIDIA is we try and fail quickly, right? So if we're going to try, we'll try a lot of things and figure out which ones work and which ones don't. I think you need to do something similar with your generative AI initiatives.
So just make your lives a little easier. Got it. Yep, Chad.
One thing that really separates generative AI from everything that's come before, lots of things do, obviously, right? It's come from grassroots up to enterprise instead of enterprise pushing down. But one thing as far as ease of use goes is you don't have to train anymore. That used to be like 90% of our jobs as data scientists was like prepping data for train. And that like just went away. I remember like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. I was blown away. We were building this app in Dataiku where you could take a picture on your cell phone of a piece of trash or trash tag, trash tag, and it would tell you whether you should put it in the trash or recycle it, which was dumb, but we thought it felt magical because we took a big existing image, convolutional neural net, and we put one layer on top of it of like 200 pictures of pieces of trash. And it took like an hour or something like that to manually label 200 pieces of trash instead of what used to, like on a classical, let's say a random forest or something, you need 100,000 records, 1 million records to get a useful piece of training. And all of a sudden, this thing was good at recognizing trash or recycling with one layer. And now LLMs have taken it a step further where you don't train at all often. Maybe you're doing a little bit of RAG, or maybe you're fine-tuning a tiny bit, but most of it is like good prompt engineering. And this really accelerates how fast you can put it inside of an existing workflow. You don't need to train anymore, and that is huge.
I think also because you don't need to train, and also going to what you said, it means you can fail really quickly. I think what we've seen in some organizations is there can often be a bit of a paralysis for finding that first use case, because you want to find that first use case that will immediately drive ROI, that'll be fantastic. I think there's a lot of value in just trying to build something, not something that would be completely useless, but it doesn't need to be the perfect project, and you will learn a lot along the way, and you'll find actually it turns out that it's really good at this thing but not really good at that thing, and then you'll start thinking about use cases that you might not have previously thought. So I think sometimes for a lot of organizations, the perfect can be the enemy of the good. And actually, given that we have so much to build over the next 5-10 years, and it's very, very cheap and easy to start building, I think just build something is a good place. Go for it.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
You did. Go for it. No, go for it. Go for it. I was done.
Oh, okay. As a follow-up to that, I've been saying to a lot of our clients for the last year that it's almost irresponsible to not try replacing existing NLP stuff with LLMs.
Oh, for sure.
Like you have 1,000 NLP pipelines, well, not 1,000, but you probably have dozens of NLP tasks or workflows already existing in your organization, paragraph summarization, entity analysis, all of this type of stuff. You should replace that with LLMs, or you should at least try like today. It'll probably work better than whatever you have.
And
So
it'll
do
take
that.
you a day.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to think about building out a chatbot you're going to roll out to your whole organization. You could like look at your stuff that's available right now and start working on it.
So I think that delves into sort of use cases. How do we choose what we should be doing? What's irresponsible to not try generative AI or LLMs on? Shifting more in terms of responsible AI for kind of society. We all are workers, we're employees, and we want to feel valued in our jobs. So when we think of AI, there is this societal, whether it's true or not, fear around what does it mean as AI becomes more and more able to carry out cognitive tasks. And we talk about kind of productivity and the role of, kind of AI literacy across organizations. Do you have any thoughts on how do we make sure that we're allowing true democratization of AI, and what is the next phase of work supposed to look like for many of us? Did we do a sigh? Was that like a...
It's a big question.
Yeah.
No more yakety yak, yada yadas? Okay, go ahead.
I thought about this a bit this morning. So last summer, I bought a new car, and I'm based here in the Midwest in Madison. And the car I replaced had almost 200,000 miles on it, and I work from home. So you do the math on how old it was. And if you only get a new car once every 16 years or so, you really notice how much cars have changed, right? And in the time between when my old car was made and when my new car was made, autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles became a big deal. Now, we don't have fully autonomous vehicles yet, but what we do have are a lot of driver assistance features. And I noticed all of those when I got my new car, and I noticed them again today when the freezing rain on I-39 covered my radar in a sheet of ice and caused them all to stop working. And it didn't mean at no point am I able to stop driving, right? I'm not optional in this equation, but the autonomous driving features make me feel better about driving. If I'm going to give a car to a teenager, I'm going to want them to have as many of these as I can plausibly put in the car, right? That makes you safer. It makes you more predictable, right? It makes you avoid making mistakes. And I think generative AI really supports knowledge workers in a similar way, right? It doesn't replace your job. It augments your job. It keeps you from making mistakes. It opens you to new possibilities. And it takes the tedious, dangerous, boring parts of your job and outsources them to a machine.
The things that I worry about when it comes to this particular question is not necessarily the people in this room. I think data people, engineering people will be very, very safe. There's a lot. I think Jed, you said earlier that like data engineering and stuff is not going away in this new future. The thing that I'm more concerned about is whether we as data organizations are educating our business on AI, and specifically like individual people. Like if I am someone in operations, who is going to teach me the value that AI can have from my productivity and the way that I work? And we should be really helping to empower everyone in our organization to adopt AIs in ways that is sensible and responsible and will help them do their work, because we are fortunate enough to be very technically literate and already understand some of these implications, but not everyone in your organization will be. And we need to figure out how we can train them so they can get the value of practical AI.
My CTO, Clement, he likes to say that the use of AI is inversely proportionate to the originality of the problem, which means that AI is very good at solving unoriginal problems or very good at doing unoriginal tasks. And it's pretty darn bad at doing brand new original things. So what that means basically is that like if your whole job is doing the same unoriginal task all the time, like, yeah, I don't know, be a little worried. But if you're coming up with new stuff, if you're doing original things, we still got a ways to go. I think your story right there is pretty good. The AI is really good at making, turns on a normal street in normal situations. But when you're in an original situation, sleet, covering up its sensors, you need a human being still to make original decisions.
Yeah, great. I think the fact that their agents, their assistants, is really kind of the crux of it. Meryem, what you said around sort of democratizing AI, helping others encompass it to their kind of habitual. I'm a marketer, so one of my favorite sort of marketing examples is when grocery stores started seeing more home cooking shows and recipes and really breaking down how everyone can have a gourmet meal in their kitchen. They saw sales changing, and that wasn't just the grocery stores. People also enjoy fine dining even more because they were aware of how to create it, what it should taste like. So hopefully it is just about bringing more people and then adding the creativity and having more assistance in the things that bring us joy and happiness and productivity. Yeah. Before we open up to Q&A, I think I'd just love to hear from each of you what is exciting about the moment right now. What do you love about your job?
I can go first. I'm going to suck up to these two a little bit. This moment has brought the ecosystem together in a way that I've never experienced before. Like everybody wants to work together to figure this whole thing out and to be there for the clients. And it's so refreshing. It's awesome. So cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting that we have this technology that has captured the popular imagination, that demos really well, and that requires a lot of computer science and engineering to make it work. Well, no, I mean, if we had more time, I have a funny, ironic career trajectory story there about how I tried to get away from high performance computing as a junior graduate student, and here I am. But yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be involved in data just because of the problems you can solve that didn't make sense. I mean, I age myself by telling the story that when I was a graduate student, you could publish a computer vision paper if you had like 75% accuracy. Right. Now I have a computer vision model in my phone that can tell my nieces apart with much better than 75% accuracy. Right. So,
I mean, I think it's very hard to not be really excited about the moment we're living in. I'm often very frustrated by people who seem to have lost the magic of ChatGPT that we all experienced at the end of 22 or beginning of 23. Like at that time, it really did feel like magic. And now models that are better than that model we first play with, we kind of take for granted. And the scale of acceleration of how good that model, those models are getting is really, really exciting. And I think there's just so much opportunity in every single organization. There's probably like 2,000 different use cases that would genuinely bring business value. So there's a lot to work on, and the ecosystem is just keeps getting better and better and better. So I'm just trying to not lose that magic that I first felt at the end of 22. In fact, the reason we started our company was because of GPT-2, and we felt magic then. And looking back to that, it feels like we've come a long way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a rule that I will only work in scopes where I feel there's helpfulness. So I think there's a lot of magic here, for sure. We have time for maybe 2 questions from the audience. Yes. There's a mic behind you.
I just wanted to ask your takes on chatbots a little bit. So I've heard some horror stories, like out of Canada, for example, with some legal ramifications. And I've dealt with some new vendors just as a consumer lately, and it sucked, honestly. Is it really that hard, or are we just not doing it right? I just want your take on it.
I have some takes on chatbots. I think actually they're a pretty poor UI, and actually for most business problems, they don't solve business problems very well, like the chatbot UI and interface. What I think the killer use cases for LLMs that we'll see won't be in the form of chatbots. They'll be far more embedded into our processes, potentially in ways that we don't even see or realize that they're there. So that's kind of just like, I just don't think chatbots are a great interface for this kind of technology, especially when it's differentiated. And when it comes to these like legal ramifications, etc., I tend to think that when you're building your first kind of couple use cases, I would always focus on internal use cases. I think going for really public external use cases at this particular time, unless you feel really, really confident or you have great disclaimers and, great education around it, can be a little bit risky. And I think there's enough of opportunity internally to start with that.
I agree with everything Meryem said about the suitability of the interface. I think chatbots are in this interesting space where there's common knowledge that they're the low-hanging fruit, and they're actually super hard, right? Yeah. The Air Canada example is a great horror story, but what if someone is just using your customer service chatbot to get help with their homework at $40 per million tokens, right? You don't want that either, right? You don't want the potential brand damage of someone escaping guardrails on a customer-facing chatbot. So I think it's a case where internal use cases may be more interesting, especially augmented with sort of context from internal data. But a customer-facing chatbot is actually not low-hanging fruit. On the other hand, a customer-facing chatbot with GPT-3.5 would be an improvement on a sort of rule-based NLP sort of entity and intent identification chatbot that you might have with an older customer-facing thing. So that's maybe exploring it in a limited way is a good place to start.
Can I actually answer that? I'm like the worst audience member of all time. So what William was just saying there around sort of like a chatbot that is your rules-based NLP interface, blah, blah, blah. is precisely what the Air Canada example in the news was. It had nothing to do with LLMs. It was actually a pre-existing case from a couple of years ago that has predated anybody's adoption of LLMs or GPT or anything like that. So that was just a regular old chatbot in the way that we've been using him for a long time. And that's why you should not always believe what you read in the newspaper.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
All right. I think we're wrapping, but we are around, and there is after data drinks. Oh, pardon? Okay, one more. Let's go. I'm peer pressured. Yes, one more question. Yes.
So you mentioned the kind of escaping guardrails that can cause brand damage. As you three in the infrastructure of this place, how are you thinking about, if you're thinking about, the new kind of class of hackers that is focusing on how you can induce models in a chatbot to display unintended behavior? Like you said,
So the question was, how are we thinking about sort of the new hacker version of being able to hack GPT by forcing unintended responses from questions? You could see a lot of examples of this on Reddit, by the way. If you follow like the ChatGPT subreddit, people are always trying to break it, like make it curse and things like that. And they pull it off pretty regularly. Like you can come up with fun ways to do that. So Dataiku is implementing as part of LLM Mesh a feature that attempts to identify this type of action and prevent it, which you can layer on top of the underlying LLMs. So we are recognizing this as a real target, and we are working to release a feature to prevent that as best we can. And I do think the prevention of that doesn't happen at the individual LLM level. The prevention of that needs to happen at a level above it, at the question or response level. Although maybe you put an LLM on top of the LLM to identify it, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'd just add to that from an information security perspective, announcing that you have a public-facing service built on an LLM is like announcing that you're running a web service on Windows 98. You're going to attract a lot of unwanted attention, and I think there are certainly ways to solve this at the application level. There are certainly guardrailing techniques. It's an active area of research. It's going to be a cat and mouse game for a long time.
I have nothing to add to these guys.
In closing, one book or podcast or interesting thing that you might recommend.
I already did it, Reddit.
Okay. Cop out. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, we'll talk about it more at After Data Drink. Sorry for springing that on you all. All right, thank you so much, Meryem, William, and Jed.